Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Laman. I am reporting today for the Film Girl Film Festival in Chicago. With me today is none other than director Sarah Kambe Holland, the director of Egghead and Twinkie, a coming of age road trip film that's not quite anything else like anything else you'll see on the indie film landscape. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
No, thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
First of all, we have to talk a little bit about the origins of this project because they had a bit of a historical backdrop to how this got made. Would you mind taking the viewers through which social media platform was very instrumental in getting Egghead and Twinkie off the ground?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, TikTok was a very big part of the story of how this film came to be. So, a little bit of background, this film is very much like a homegrown micro budget endeavor. So, for me, I was trying to think of everything that we could do to get our production budget together, grants, crowdfunding, etc. And TikTok ended up being really instrumental in promoting and marketing our crowdfunding campaign.
Fantastic. Now, you've got the money. What's really especially impressive, though, about Egghead and Twinkie is that those funds were then used for such interesting visual flourishes in the film, including recurring pieces of animation from animator director Jill Cifello Sanders. Would you mind telling me how Jill came to be a part of the project?
It's TikTok again, actually. So I knew that I wanted to have animation in the film, but I personally do not know how to animate. So we posted a crew call of sorts on TikTok, and we got hundreds of submissions from all over the world and, put them through kind of an interview process. And that's how we found Jill, who's based in Cleveland. And they're a super talented animator. And most of our collaboration was remote. We would Zoom like once a week and talk about the visuals and how we wanted to use them to highlight Twinkie's emotional state throughout the film. So it was really collaborative and a really fun process. And we did not meet for like 2 years. So all of our relationship was like totally remote. And then we finally met in person last year at the BFI Flair Film Festival, which was awesome.
That's amazing. I'm sure that you've already mentioned that it took a while to get the visual effects and everything finished. I'm sure shooting a film with this much visual effects work was a bit complicated. On the official Egghead and Twinkie website, it's mentioned that there are 200 VFX shots in the film, which is 50 more than Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Could you take us through what it's like shooting a film with such interesting visual flourishes that the actors won't see until long after the film's finished shooting?
Well, that is a crazy fun fact that I did not know. Yeah, we do have 200 VFX shots in the film, which was kind of crazy to me because you wouldn't think that it being like a coming of age teen movie. But it was everything from, there's a lot of social media that's included in the film. Twinkie kind of meets her love interest on an Instagram like app. So all of the screens in the film had to be added in post because we designed all of the social media interfaces, all of the text interfaces ourselves. So that was a lot of the VFX side of it. But yeah, I really wanted to lean into kind of a unique visual style because Twinkie wants to be an animator when she grows up. And that's obviously where Jill comes in. But beyond that, the way that we shot it, the cinematography, the transitions, all were kind of alluding to animation and like anime shows that I love and like comics that I've read growing up. So all of that was kind of tied into the overall visual aesthetic.
I love that. Now, the distinctive qualities of Egghead and Twinkie aren't just limited to the visuals or the animation. It's also narratively a very distinctive film. What inspired y'all to pursue a nonlinear narrative structure, especially in the first half of the film, where we begin basically at the end of the second act with them already in the diner, and then we keep cutting back and forth across time? What inspired such a unique narrative structure?
I think it comes from wanting to put the viewer in Twinkie's shoes and to see the world through her eyes. So obviously we have the animated flourishes kind of reflecting her colorful worldview, but then the structure of it as well, because we open on Egghead and Twinkie in this diner, and Egghead basically asks her, "What's going on? How did we get here?" And Twinkie, has to go back in time and tell him this story. So I don't know about you, but when I tell a story, I get distracted easily, or like I'll forget this one part and then I have to go back to it. So there's like a lot of jumping when I'm telling a story. So we felt that that was kind of an organic storytelling structure to have it be in that kind of nonlinear pattern.
Oh, in all honesty, it reminded me a lot of how me and my friends were all gay, just chit chatting about memories. It always goes down like three different roads and stuff. It feels like a that jagged recreation. Um,
Exactly, yeah.
Now, I do have to ask about the sun costume, which is anyone who sees the film is going to fall in love with that. How did that visual evolve? Like, it fits so well with the kind of like goofy, corny, like homegrown business mascot. How did that visual evolve? Was it always a sun? I'm just so curious about it.
So when I was, in the brainstorm stage for this script, I had this running doc on my phone where I would just write down things that I thought were funny. And near my college campus, I would always see this really sad looking sun mascot on the side of the road advertising a suntan
Whoa.
salon. And I was like, oh my God, that poor person. Like, I don't know who they are, but that seems like the worst job ever. So I think that like lodged into my mind. And I wrote that down on my in my little notes doc. And when it came time to actually sit down and write the script, I was like, I need to pull this in some way, and it needs to come back like later in the film as a big gag. So yeah, it was something I was really excited to do. And then we really leaned into like, how can we make this costume as horrific and terrifying as possible?
Yes.
So that was really a collaboration between myself and then our production design and wardrobe team to really bring that to life.
That's definitely the best part about it. It doesn't feel like something that's supposed to be a Funko Pop. It feels very like off-putting in a realistic way. Speaking of costume choices, for my money, the best scene of the film is our mid-fashion scene montage with Jess and Twinkie. It's so fun. It's just delightful. I want to know everything about how that came together, from the needle drops to just what it was like to shoot it. It's just so interesting. Could you take our viewers down the path of creating such an emotionally important scene for Twinkie's journey?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite scenes too, and it was so fun to film. I think for me, it really started with wanting to subvert kind of the teenage makeover trope that we see in a lot of teen movies. So I feel like when we see that scene, usually it's like, oh, let's take this alternative or kind of out of the box person and make them conventionally attractive and make them subscribe to all of these norms. So with this, I was like, I want to do the opposite of that. I want it to be a makeover montage scene, but it's like Twinkie and Jess celebrating their queerness. And in Jess's outfit, she's wearing like a Hawaii jacket. So like celebrating her Japanese heritage as well. And like really pulling in um, like all of these colorful elements that make them feel like truly like themselves. So it's like a celebration of identity is really what it's meant to be. So I was talking about that with our production designer, with our two main talents, Sabrina, who plays Twinkie, and Asahi, who plays Jess. And everyone was just so excited about that scene. And then when it came time to film it, it was just really fun. I mean, we were like blasting the song because we knew we were going to use that song at that point when we were in production. So they were like dancing to the actual song. My DP's just running around the room with them. And yeah, it was so much fun.
It's delightful. It's such a great sequence. All that fun definitely came through. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I'm always curious to hear this from directors. What would you say was the most challenging scene to shoot in all of Egghead and Twinkie?
Ooh, okay, that might be a tie situation.
You're
Um,
allowed to say both.
am I allowed to give spoilers? Like, how much should I say?
You know what? Say whatever you feel comfortable with. Just listeners and viewers, there may be some spoilers ahead, but you just say whatever is comfortable.
All right, I'll keep it vague. So there's a scene, a chase scene where Egghead and Twinkie are running around outside in the dark, and that one was quite challenging because most of the movie, being low budget, is two people talking in a diner, talking in a car, talking outside. Like there's a lot of talking. And this one scene, I was like, I want an action scene, I want a chase scene, and that just it comes with a lot of complications, especially since we were shooting outdoors at night. It was a really big concern. We were like, oh my God, we don't want like the neighbors to call the police on us because there's a bunch of people yelling and running around. So there are just like a lot of logistics to sort out. But we did get it done, but it was a lot. And then the other one I would say is just a scene that was very emotionally heavy for Sabrina, who plays Twinkie. There's a scene where Twinkie really has to kind of break down, and it is the emotional core of the film. And she is incredible. Sabrina, who plays Twinkie, is an incredible actress. But it was tough in the way that we filmed it. We were really doing it all in one take. It's not how it plays out in the actual scene, but for her, I mean, these were like long, 5 to 10 minute takes that we were doing. And it was hard on my DP as well, having to follow her and, keep up with that. And just very emotionally heavy. And I remember, we're all like very focused and it's emotional and we're trying to get it. And all of a sudden the sprinklers go off. And
No. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
and we were like, "Oh no." We were like trying to cover the camera, Sabrina's getting wet, and it was like that was the moment where I thought, "Oh no, is this all just gonna fall apart?" But thankfully we were able to come back from it, and I'm very happy with the scene as it ended up being.
You should. First of all, that was a very. I know just what you're talking about, and that's great. Secondly, these stories really speak to a quality of the film that's subtly impressive, which is the tangibility. The fact that y'all were shooting this so much on location really lends this authenticity to all the environments, especially in contrast to the more stylized elements. And I was just curious, what was like the best location to shoot in for y'all? Like, what would you say was your favorite place, a practical location to shoot in?
Ooh, I don't think I've ever gotten that question before. That's such a fun question. We shot at 22 different locations, so there's a lot to choose from. But, I would say maybe the diner, which is kind of our
Ooh.
home base. It's where Egghead and Twinkie are reunited, and Twinkie's telling him the story of how they got there. So it's really like the narrative thread of the film that like ties it all together. So I knew it was going to be really important. And it was the hardest location to get. We could not get a diner to say yes to us, which I understand because it's a big ask. Like, hey, can we film in your restaurant after hours? That means one of their employees is going to have to sit in overnight to watch us. And yeah, it's just a lot of trust and a big ask. So we got a lot of no's, 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 no's. And we finally got a yes. And I'll be honest, when we first got it, I was like, visually, this is not 100% really what I wanted. There was kind of like, oh, we're going to have to settle situation. But then my production design team came in and like completely transformed the space. And when I saw it on
Whoa.
camera, I was like, oh wow, like this is amazing. So I think it's one of those where it's like I didn't expect it to be one of my favorites, but it ended up being one of my favorites.
That's amazing. That's such good creativity on the spot. Speaking of locations, the epic location our main characters are trying to get to is called the Hideout. And as someone living in Dallas, where Twinkie and Egghead are headed, I was so amused that that is very much a pastiche of real gay clubs and bars, the Hideaway and the Hidden Door that are in Dallas. Being from Austin yourself, hop and skip away. I was curious, what kind of experiences with Texas queer culture and stuff informed the decision to name the Hideout the way it looked. I was just curious what realities of Texas queer culture informed that element of the script.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm being honest, it was actually more informed by Florida queer culture than than Texas, even though it is set in Texas in the narrative. Just because for me, I grew up in Texas, but I left when I was 17, so I didn't really get
Mhm.
much exposure to like queer nightlife. So I was more so pulling from just like Southern queer spaces, like in general. Um, I don't know, it was really important to me that this film be like a Southern queer story because they're traveling from Florida to Texas in the narrative, and that's a route that I'm very familiar with because I was living in Florida, but my family lives in Texas, so it was a lot of that back and forth. Um, and I don't know, I think queer spaces in the South are so unique because obviously, there's a lot of struggle down here. And I think that those areas where we can come together as a community are all the more important because they're like the areas where we can feel safe and comfortable. So that's why I kind of built in to the story that Twinkie is not only traveling to Texas to meet BD, but because she wants to go to this queer, like lesbian party and finally be around other queer people because she's never had that in her whole life. So I think that for her, it's just as much about like going there to be a part of a community as it is to go there to meet, this girl.
I First of all, that's all great. I'm not sure what you mean when you say there are struggles in the South. It's all peachy in Texas. I can
Oh,
tell you.
yeah.
It's all for trans folks. It's great. There's no problems.
Oh, no, and in Florida, same thing, totally peachy, so
Everything's, but you bringing up the community aspect of what brings Twinkie down here reminded me that the film is so good at subverting a lot of the norms for queer women in cinema, namely the fact that Twinkie isn't dead at the end of the film. Her story isn't at the expense of a cishet protagonist. Something else I loved is that Twinkie is allowed to be morally complex because she's a teenager. Teenagers do dumb, selfish things. That's why you're 17. Was there ever pressure from, because you guys got independent financing, so I'd assume this isn't as big of a deal. Was there ever pressure or like creative indecision over that element of like trying to soften up Twinkie in the making of the film? Because that's just one of my favorite things about it is how realistically flawed she is.
Thank you for that. That absolutely was a big part of the conversation at both the script stage and then again when we were in post. It was really interesting because we did a lot of test screenings when we were in the edit where we would show it to audiences and get their feedback. And there was a period of time where I thought, oh no, everyone's just going to think Twinkie's an asshole. Because a lot of those test audiences would be like, oh, I hate Twinkie. She sucks, blah, 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 blah.
Oh no.
But at the same time, I was like, she's a teenager. She is going to be selfish. She is going to make dumb decisions. And like, as a person, she's very much someone that reacts off of emotion. Like, she reacts first and thinks later, whereas Egghead is the opposite of that. He like overthinks everything. And that was a dynamic that I felt was really true and honest and real. So it was really a matter in post of like trying to toe that line between Twinkie having her asshole moments, but then people understanding where it's coming from and understanding that it's coming from a place of vulnerability. So that was a really interesting kind of process in the edit of like figuring out, oh, which takes do we pull in, what do we show, what do we not show. But I totally agree, it was really important for me to have a character who is kind of morally complex and like does things that are not great sometimes, because I mean, just because like queer people aren't perfect, we're people too. We make really, really bad decisions sometimes. And I felt like that was important to include.
Oh, well, I mean, like, gosh knows, in the canon of cishet male teenage protagonists, like Bender from the Breakfast Club
Yeah.
makes Twinkie look like a saint. Like, I think it's fine if she's a little selfish sometimes. Speaking of the vulnerabilities of Twinkie, I want to go back to another scene with Jess and Twinkie for a second, which is their quiet bedtime conversation, specifically the very subtle way animation is incorporated into the scene. I was curious what the thought process was behind injecting those little pieces that reflect Twinkie's interests in a scene that's so grounded and emotionally raw. Because if done wrong, obviously that could overwhelm the emotions of the scene or vice versa, but there's a delicate balance at play, and I was curious what it was like trying to execute that balance.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that was like an ongoing fluid process between Jill, the lead animator, and myself, where we were kind of going through the film. Because when I wrote the script, I'd written certain animated cues to happen, like, oh, I want heart bubbles to appear here, I want flowers to grow here, blah, blah, blah. But then when we got into actually bringing in the animation, there was a fluidity to it where Jill would be like, oh, well, what if we added this, or what if we added this? And then there was kind of a second pass that happened where we went through the film and we thought, is the animation enhancing every moment, or are there some moments where it'd be stronger without it? So sometimes you kind of have to go in and kill your darlings. So some scenes we were like, actually, this is better without it. So funny enough, there's a section in the film where Twinkie's really at her lowest point after she's had kind of that breakdown and she's really struggling with herself. And originally there was some animation that was planned for that section of the film. It's about 15 minutes of the film. And when Jill and I were watching it together, we were like, actually, we feel like this will be a lot more impactful if all of the animation suddenly stops, because Twinkie, her world has become very bleak for this section of the movie. And then, later when things kick back off, then the animation kind of comes back in full force. But that was a discovery that was made in post. That wasn't one that I had quite figured out when I was writing the script.
Yeah, I mean, what's that? I can't quite remember the exact Barry Jenkins quote, but I love what he said about like artists are always improvising. No matter what big or small film you're doing, you're always improvising. Now, Egghead and Twinkie is part of a very sacred tradition of movies in cinema history. I'm talking about the road trip movie. Sarah, I have to ask, what road trip movies did you use as a guiding light in making this? Because there's so many good ones.
Oh, there's so many. And funny enough, there's like a lot of queer road trip movies as well, which I've made the joke. I'm like, are we like always running away from something? Like, what's going on? We're always hitting the road. But yeah, absolutely. Road trip movies in general, I would say Little Miss Sunshine is one of my personal favorites. So that's up there. Um, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Um, I'd say you could even argue The Incredibly True Adventures of Two Girls in Love is kind of a road movie at the end. So they're running away. Um, yeah, no, I don't know. I love road movies. I think they're so fun, and I think that that's what drew me to this storyline initially was I feel like a lot of indie features end up being, two characters in a house talking, which is fine because it makes sense, and then you can do a lot with that, budget-wise. But for me, I was like, I feel like taking it on the road, at least visually, we will be able to see a lot of cool and interesting visuals, and we'll be able to go on this physical journey alongside their emotional journey, which was really appealing to me.
Well, that's funny you bring up Little Miss Sunshine, first of all, because that actually segues into something else I was going to ask regarding the use of a song from Jukebox the Ghost that is in one of the final scenes of the feature, which really accentuated this idea of the vibe evoking late 2000s, early 2010s indie films, which Little Miss Sunshine is a part of. And I was curious if that era of indie cinema specifically influenced the making of Egghead Twinkie, or if that was just a big old coincidence.
Oh, no, 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 absolutely. I mean, those were the coming of age movies that I watched growing up. So definitely. Like Juno was another really big influence, just in kind of like the quippy, awkward dialogue. And yeah, when I was fleshing out the soundtrack for the film, both, the sync songs as well as the score, that was a big conversation that I had between myself and the composer of the film, who is actually the lead singer of Jukebox the Ghost. Ben Thornwell is the composer. And I told him, I was like, I'm kind of torn because the coming of age movies that I've grown up watching, like Juno, Little Miss Sunshine, there are many more. They all had kind of like a plucky acoustic soundtrack, like a lot of plucky acoustic guitar. And I was like, I'm torn between that and then the more modern day coming of age movies like Love, Simon, Heartstopper had come out by then. A lot of the newer ones were actually pulling in like synth, which was interesting, like synth and
Yeah,
electro stuff. So I was like, I don't know which way we should go. Should we go acoustic or should we go synth? And we ended up doing a blend of the two to kind of harken to the older coming of age movies and then the newer stuff that's coming out now.
that's fantastic. Speaking of stuff towards the end of the film, the end credits of Egghead Twinkie are fantastically fun, including, well, I won't spoil here, but one particular word bubble that is tied with the last lines in the end credits of Problemista as the funniest end credits of 2024 so far. Can you explain to our viewers how did those end credits come to be?
Oh, wow, I'm so glad to hear you say that because those end credits were nearly the death of me. Um, they're so
Oh god.
hard. Um, so the post process for Egghead and Twinkie was really long because as you mentioned, there's animation, there's 200 VFX shots, and I was overseeing a lot of this as well as co-editing alongside my two co-editors, Anna and Christy. So I was very, very much involved. And we're reaching the end credits, and I'm so tired. And I'm like, this has been going on for like a year. I'm like, can I just slap some text on a black background and call it a day? But I thought, "Ah, no, we can't do that. It doesn't fit the vibe of the movie. Like, we need something colorful and fun." So I actually designed all of the end credits in Photoshop, which I would not recommend doing because it was a massive file. But yeah, design the whole thing in Photoshop. And then the comic that we see was drawn by Jill Cefalos Sanders, the animator, so that it matches everything else. So it was like bringing in those scans and then bringing in a bunch of other elements and really, yeah, designing it to be exactly what we needed it to be. And it's a total pain every time we see like, oh, there's a typo in the credits. We have to go back into that massive Photoshop
Right.
file, and it's horrible. So I'm glad to hear
Oh,
that it was hopefully worth it.
no, it's very endearing. It's a perfect, like, lighthearted way to end the film. It's really nice. we've gone through a lot of elements of the film, but let's take a step back for a second to before this film, where Egghead and Twinkie originated as a short film. Much like Whiplash and other indie classics, Egghead and Twinkie had a long shelf life before feature films. What would you say was the biggest lesson you learned in graduating from taking the story from 8 minutes to 90 plus?
Oh, wow. That's such a great big question. I learned so many things, and a lot of them were kind of trial by fire because there are some things you really can't prepare for until you're doing it, and so many things that will go wrong, and you have to figure out the solution. I guess I would say the biggest thing with the jump from short to feature is just like continuity and pacing, because we shot for 45 days, spread out over the course of a year.
Right.
And, with the way that we were shooting it, it could be something as crazy as, hey guys, we're going to shoot, the kiss scene today. And then tomorrow we're going to film the end scene of the whole movie. And then the day after that, we're filming the very first scene. So like we're jumping all over the place. And for the talent, I felt like it was so important for Lewis and Sabrina to always be able to come to me as like the person to ground them in like where we are and where we've come from and where we're going. So as a director, every morning when I would wake up, I would like go through my notes, recenter on like where in the story are we? What is Twinkie feeling? What's Egghead feeling? That way I could be that person for Lewis and Sabrina when they needed it. Cause sometimes they'd forget. They'd be like, Sarah, have we left Florida yet? Like, where are we? What are we doing? It's like a lot to
Right.
keep track of. So, yeah, I'd say that was the biggest challenge, and something that I never had to think about when I was doing short form work.
That's fantastic. Sarah, I think I do want to wrap this conversation up by asking, you thought the last question was big. This is a bit heady. For our viewers, could you, if you feel like you could name two, would you mind please naming your two favorite pieces of lesbian cinema? I am always curious.
Oh my gosh, putting me on the spot, Lisa.
I'm putting you on the spot, Sarah. The tough questions.
There's so many good ones. Hmm. Feel like I'm gonna go with like two complete opposites
Do
just to
it.
like cover the whole spectrum. Um, I really have a soft spot for Saving Face, as like
Yes.
as a queer Asian, like, rom-com movie, and I discovered that after I had written the short for Egghead and Twinkie, because everyone kept saying, "Oh, you have Asian lesbians in your movie? I'm sure you've seen Saving Face." Like, I kept hearing about Saving Face, so, I watched it, and I really think it was so ahead of its time, and I think it holds up really well. And yeah, representation-wise means a lot to me. And then okay, yeah, going complete other end of the spectrum, I would
Go.
say, Monster, which was filmed and set in Florida, and it's about murderous lesbians, which is,
Mm.
yeah, other end of the spectrum.
I like I mean, only in Florida. Like that's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And we always love to hear an Alice Wu shout out. I wish we could just get a new movie from her every other year because she's a master. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today about Egghead and Twinkie. It's been lovely to hear every aspect of your thought process behind the film.
No, no, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun, and you asked a lot of questions I've never been asked before, so
Well, I'm grateful for that. I hope we encourage as many people as possible to check this one out when it comes near them. This Egghead and Twinkie will be playing in Chicago tomorrow night, March 31st at 7 p.m. So get your tickets online. Thank you again, Sarah. And we will see you all at the next interview.
great. Thanks so much.